Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pluralism Initiative's first event of the spring semester. I'm Liza Oliver, Director of the Initiative and Associate Professor of Art History. And I'm going to jump right into introductions, but before I do, I want to provide everyone with a friendly reminder that this is a space for diverse views and beliefs, often on very challenging topics, as is the topic of this evening's event. And your presence in this space is synonymous with your agreement in a social contract, one that requires you to engage with our guests and each other with respect, and to listen and to tolerate differences of viewpoint. And as with all of our events, the first hour will be devoted to conversation between our two guests, and the last half hour will be opened up to conversation with students and members of the audience. So this evening, we are honored to have with us Jaser AbuMousa. Jaser is a civil engineer and project manager by training, holding a bachelor's and master's of science from the Islamic University of Gaza. Prior to October 7th, he was a program officer working for the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Jaser also served in the UN Department of Safety and Security, working during the 2014 war to report incidents, coordinated movements, and follow political developments. Prior to that, Jaser was a social worker for the United Nations Relief and Work Agency in the aftermath of the 2009 war. Between 2006 and 2009, he worked extensively as a political researcher in a Gaza-based think tank, and during this period, he reported on and analyzed Hamas's rise to power. After October 7th, Jaser lost his wife and two children in the Gaza war, and left Gaza with his remaining two children for treatment for his son in the UAE. Since arriving in the United States in 2024, Jaser has served as a Yale Peace Fellow, examining how Gaza's post-war reconstruction can reflect Palestinians' priorities while repairing the social fabric of society. And he is soon to begin a position with the Middle East Institute. He will be engaging in conversation this evening with Lior Frankiensztajn, Senior Fellow at the Harvard Negotiation Project. Lior is currently developing the Possibilities Lab for the Middle East, an initiative designed to expand and ground how key stakeholders understand and work toward possibilities for a more integrated, safe, and prosperous region. He is the founder and former executive director of the Negotiation Strategies Institute, or NSI, which he led for over a decade. In that capacity, he engaged key stakeholders in the Israeli-Palestinian context in exploratory processes at strategic levels, with factions, organizations, and among adversaries, contributing to a wide range of policy domains and outcomes. Among other initiatives, he designed and co-led the NSI's flagship Advanced Leadership Program, held under the academic sponsorship of the Harvard Negotiation Project, which convenes 30 mid-career and senior government officials and policy influencers for a year-long learning journey on the art and science of negotiation. The program now includes a network of more than 300 influential Palestinian, Israeli, Egyptian, Jordanian, European, and U.S. officials. At NSI, he also initiated and supported numerous efforts contributing to crisis mitigation, geopolitical negotiations, and after-action reviews of high-stakes negotiations and events. Lior holds a master's in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School and a BA in government, diplomacy, and strategy from Reichman University in Israel. And with that, please join me in welcoming Lior and Jaser.
Thank you, Liza. And thank you for having us. It's a real pleasure and being here with you here today. And it's a true honor and privilege to be with you, Jaser. And we've known each other we've been talking for the past few months, and it's a big difference talking in private and talking in a public setting, and just getting to know you and your personal journey. It's really humbling, and I really feel privileged and honored to be here with you. And I want to start by actually creating a certain frame. We all come with certain. Well, let's talk about judgment. We all judge. That's part of what makes us who we are, and our judgment got us to where we are today. And when you look at Jaser and I, you see a certain frame. It could be an oppressed, an oppressor, a victim. It can be two guys who are sitting and talking, and an Israeli and Palestinian. It can be many, many different things. What I'm asking you to do for a second is actually to be very conscious of your judgment of how do you feel and what do you think about what we are and what this frame is, and really just surface it for yourself, because I'm sure you have an inner voice that tells you something about why you are here and what you're seeing in front of your eyes. So I'm just asking you to grab that and really listen to that voice of judgment, appreciate it, because that's who you are and that's what led you to where you are today, and that's great. And whatever that judgment might be, and as you listen to it carefully, I also invite you to put it on the side, on a shelf for this evening. And my invitation is really, if you can try to learn something different, something new. So that's kind of my frame for this conversation, my frame for these conversations in general, for any interaction, any negotiation, any difficult engagement or challenging engagement. This is my suggestion or my invitation to you. And I want to suggest, or I want to share that from my perspective, we're coming here as a Palestinian, as an Israeli. For me, what's very salient that we're coming as fathers, as family members, as two men who really care about our society and community, and we see ourselves as protectors, the people who really want to protect both our family and our environments and the future of our family. And that's the lens, at least, that I think both of us share as we're coming into this. And before moving into the conversation, which I want us to focus on the past, before October 7th, the realities in Gaza. I want us to focus on the present, and I want us to focus also on the future. And I know Jaser has a lot of experience and his life journey that can shed a lot of valuable light into those three different time frames. But I want us actually to start by asking you, Jaser, very, very fundamental, and for me, basic questions of, with everything that you went through, the loss of your wife, your children, your mother, your sister, the devastation, the way you are carrying your kids here, what makes a man's heart to actually be in a conversation with me, with an Israeli? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Lior, for this introduction, and thank you, Liza. Thank you, Wellesley, for having us. It's a great honor to be here, and I think what brings me here and what brings you here, I think it's fundamental, and I think I've never planned actually to be a public speaker or something or someone who appears in front of people. I was enjoying my roles behind the curtains, but I realized very early when I came to the United States, and I may correct you, Liza, I came only 1 year ago in January. So I came in January 25, and I realized not only my story, but the absence of the Gazan voice and the absence of the real-time or the real life experience in Gaza was totally absent, and Gaza was taken like a block or was taken like an object or something. So the people dealt with Gaza from different point of view, from different aspects, as one object or one block that they judged according to the time being, especially after the October 7th attack. And there was a lot of abstraction, a lot of summarization of what happened on that day and what happened after. So I felt very responsible actually to come out, and this is part of what I'm doing. Another thing that is very personal, what I've been through is unbearable, to be honest. And I really don't want anyone to be going through what I've been through. This is my contribution. I know it's humble. I know it's modest, but I will keep trying.
Well, it's huge, it's big, and it's very brave. And I know there's no going around your personal story, but I actually, I want us to, if you can take us to the life in Gaza before October 7th. And I know Gaza has been a very troubled and difficult place to live in for many, many years. But from not a big political place, but actually from a very personal day-to-day life as, somebody who's living in Gaza.
So let's start when, of course, Gaza was occupied in 1967, and following this, it has passed through different stages from the occupation, 1967, then the disengagement, or in 2005, and before that the PA when it came in 1994. But I will start the history because I started to be politically active in 2000, almost 2000, with the Second Intifada broke out. And then in 2005 there was the disengagement plan, which was unilateral from the Israeli side, and I think it was a trap for the Palestinians. I have my reasons to believe so. In 2006, Hamas won the elections, and 2007 they took Gaza by force, and in September 2007, the same year, the Israeli government has categorized Gaza as a hostile entity and imposed unprecedented siege on Gaza. And this siege has actually formed the life of 2 generations at least, or 3 generations. Gaza is a very young society. More than half of the population are children. The Israeli economy was the main employer before 2000 for Gaza. And I remember in 2000, the population of Gaza was 1.3 million. And 100,000 people were going to Israel for daily work. If you do the math, this was representing more than 80% of the workforce. Then this number has approached 0 after 2000. And in 2007, after the siege, not only this, but Gaza was deprived from any meaning of real life. So the electricity was cut. There was something called the dual use list that was introduced, and recently it was more than 1,000 items that were needed for reconstruction, for industry, for every aspect of life. So ending by 22, let's say, because I memorized the numbers from 2022. So we had 47% of Gaza unemployment rate. We had 65% of poverty rate, which was categorized or identified by the World Bank like $2 per day per person, which is a very ridiculous amount of money. Then we have 80% of the population are totally dependent on humanitarian aid. We have a spike in the infant mortality rate, and that was it was a deflection actually, because it was keeping down and suddenly it went up. This tells a lot about the social and economic and political and mental health indicators. You need to imagine how this affected the psychology of the people. In 2016, I was doing Al-Hajj in Mecca, and I was with 880 people in one hotel, and these people were afraid to go out of the hotel unless they are escorted to the
Gazans, people from Gaza,
yeah,
who are traveling to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, for the 5th pillar of Islam. So these people were afraid to go out of the hotel. They were afraid to go around. They were doing their shopping around the hotel. That's it. And I was.
Can you say more about? Maybe it's obvious, but can you talk more about why?
I think they were. The besiege has lived inside them. So they do not want to be exposed to anyone. They do not want to be lost or something. They do not want to experience new things. So I started in 2016 to realize that's how the siege has affected the psychology of the people, and how affected how the people are looking at themselves and how looking at the outer world. This, coupled with the repetitive escalation rounds that continued from 2008 until 2023, with keeping the people living in a continuous trauma that affected every aspect of life. So at least we had 2 rounds of escalation every year. And it was very predictable, very for economic reasons, for political reasons. And so we had this, we had an announced Israeli policy towards Gaza that was spoken out by the defense minister in 2016, Avigdor Lieberman, when he said that our policy towards Gaza is to keep the head above the water. So they do not allow life, they do not allow death. But we have also the Israeli government calculating the calories for Gazans to not to die. So this was very, so by reaching 2022, I think we have, or we had a broken society in terms of everything. We had a very unrealistic priorities and living conditions. For the first time in Gaza, the rate of marriages was going down. This was very alarming because it's very conservative society, and people get married in a very early age. So when this goes without getting married or ending up in a prison because they could not pay the loans that they are taking for marriages. We had a very unrealistic and plastic image of a society that is standing together. In addition to the negative coping that other people will call it resilience, but I would call it negative coping mechanism that the people develop to cope up with life.
Yeah, and it's interesting the term resilience, because of course humans are resilient. We're built biologically to survive, but it's also about what are the challenges that you're facing. You will always be resilient. You will always try to survive, but the question how much you have to endure, and that changes the nature of your society, your mentality, your way of thinking, how you prioritize. But I want to, if that's okay by you, but if you can paint us a picture of just, you give us a very kind of a political or geopolitical analysis of a view of thing with history as well, but just a day of life, your family life. I know that you're very active because you've had this incredible career that on the one hand, you're working with the Swiss mission in Gaza, which is a very special mission because they are the only ones, one of 2 governments in the world, more or less, in the West, that are allowed to actually engage with Hamas. You were working with them, basically, I understood from what you told me, doing everything from security to programming to driving the key people because you know all the areas. So you're engaging with diplomats, which is a privilege in a sense because nobody was, there was no access to the outside world in Gaza. But you were actually working at the grassroots level, with the community level, on the ground, with initiatives, with entrepreneurs, with social workers. So you really have a very special wide range of kind of experiences. And I'm trying to get the human side of Gaza, not the analytical side of Gaza, in terms of, I know your wife was incredibly brave in doing certain things and was very active, and she was an author, and your kids, you're very proud of them. And so if you can give us just a little bit of a color of just how the day-to-day life in Gaza was before October 7th.
First of all, I want to say something about the Swiss. I was not doing this because I'm a Superman, but because they were actually fond of the Swiss knife concept, and they wanted me to do everything. And they were paying me like one person, by the way. So, yeah, I was very privileged in terms of Gaza society. I mean, my father was a doctor, my mother was a lawyer, and I was coming from a very educated family, from a very good economic status, and I joined the UN, the Swiss, as you said. But for example, my son that he was killed when he was 18, he never saw 24 hours of electricity all of his life. I mean, he was born in 2005, and immediately the Israeli warplanes destroyed the only power plant in Gaza. So this is, I mean, a very metaphor for this. But we were trying to cope. It was not easy. With all what I have, I mean, I used to say that to live normally in Gaza, you need to be a millionaire, because the normal life was a fantasy in Gaza. Any normal life, that I'm talking about fresh water, I'm talking about electricity, I'm talking about, but some people were able to afford it, but 95% of the people were not. So yeah, this kind of stuff, and it's strange because, for example, when I was working on a project called the youth employment in Gaza, so we put like or we identified some problems with the unemployment, and it was a massive problem. So we started an incubator with the University College of Applied Sciences in Gaza, and it was where my wife was teaching, and it's not a conflict of interest because we work on different things. So we started this in 2017 with 1.2 million, and we ended up in 2023. The budget of the program was $40 million, and this because actually the value of what we were doing was paying off. We accelerated and started 50 companies in Gaza. We sent cohorts to Switzerland to get ties with Swiss companies, high-tech companies, and they got back to Gaza, formed their teams, and started working. I'm very proud of this. And on the other file that I was following was the local governance, and it inspired me because for the first time ever, we put the power to decide in the hands of the people. And we replaced the equation. So we, for example, bought like 300,000 for an infrastructure project. And we gathered the people, they elected their community committee. And it was amazing because the people were able to put every aspect of differences outside the room. They negotiated on the interest of their communities, and they were able to communicate the decision to the municipality and they wanted the money to be dispersed. Mentioning this, I found it very inspiring because when they felt that they have the power, they mobilized their own resources, and in many projects, we put like 300,000. They were able to raise a similar amount, and they completed the project. They put something else. For example, they put desalination plants, they solar panels for lighting the streets, etc. I think there's a power within the Palestinian people, and they can be resilient. But and I think resilience is what they were doing all the time. But recently, I think the 20 years after 2007, Gaza was sealed, bombarded, and turned to be very broken. And despite that, there was a glance of hope, and we used this. And unfortunately, everything was falling apart. And I have to say something to commemorate my friends that I worked with in the incubator, that they were targeted, all of them, they were targeted and killed. Not only because, they were politically I don't think they were have any kind of political affiliation, but they were technicals. They were US graduates, Europe graduates, but yeah, this is what happened. Yeah.
And well, it's I'm very sorry for your losses, and I know that you lost a lot of friends as well along the way, and colleagues, and of course family. And there's also a question about faith. I know that you're a person of faith, and you pray 5 times a day. And how do you reconcile everything that has happened and is still happening in terms of just the hardship? And we will talk more about the hardship today and the challenges today and going forward. But from as a man of faith, how do you reconcile all of this that is happening?
It's a very hard question, but I will try to answer. Yes, alhamdulillah, I'm a man of faith, and I believe that, our faith tells us to believe that every bad thing or good thing would never happen to anyone else if it was meant to you or meant to others. So I believe that the span of life or the age, that it's predetermined, and the way of death and the place of death is predetermined already. But this does not mean that I alleviate or spare people from responsibility. I think this does not conflict with demanding at least the people who did this to me or to my family and who did this to the Palestinians. I'm not very unique. There are 70,000 people killed at least. And everyone has a story, everyone is a human being. And there are 10,000 people not accounted for so far. So whoever did this needs to be held accountable. And we need actually to be honest with ourselves as human beings, because without being honest, being honest is the first stage to reconcile as a humans. I'm not talking about reconciliation in general. But back to your question, I think it's the acceptance of the new reality, and it took me like 3 days after the first strike. I was very lost, and I think there was a moment I was taking the crutches for my son in the hospital, and I was hoping, literally hoping, that the Israeli drone operator will consider it like a weapon and shoot me from the sky, and that's it. But the first word that I told my son after he woke up, I told him that everything is predetermined and we were kept alive for a reason. And I still believe that there is a purpose for any human being in this life. And I'm trying to fulfill this purpose.
You mentioned 2005, the disengagement. Used the word unilateral disengagement, and I think also you mentioned there's something around, that was an important aspect of that process, and that had a huge impact on Gaza and the future of Gaza. Can you say more about that, and what did you mean by that?
I think it goes more to the legal aspect of the unilateral disengagement, and legal-wise, I think the Israelis have taken out their soldiers, the settlers, out of Gaza, but at the same time they spared themselves from the responsibility on Gaza as occupied piece of land. or occupied territory. So, and started actually to promote that Gaza is free, that Gaza is blah, blah. But at the same time, Gaza was besieged. Israel has controlled everything that comes in or comes out from Gaza, either from the sea, and they actually limited the fishing, for example, for 3 nautical miles. And at the same time, they worked with the Egyptians to control Rafah crossing. And it was, I think, the disengagement was the first seed for the Palestinian internal division, because on both sides, on Hamas side and on the PA side, everyone was claiming victory over this, but Hamas actually was the one with more guns and with more, so they ended up with taking Gaza forcefully in 2007 and started this kind of dark chapter of Gaza history. I think it was a trap, because eventually we, as Palestinians, we fell in a very bitter Palestinian division that until now there's. I mean, if this kind of war and this kind of what happened to Gaza did not yet unify the Palestinians, I don't know what else.
So there is also a very strong, at least a very dominant Israeli point of view, and that there was a disengagement from Gaza, and you can be critical of the way it was done and even the intentions of it, but in reality, the Israelis, both militarily and from a civilian perspective, population perspective, disengaged, and the Palestinians had a choice. And the result of the choice that was made, we see today. What do you answer to that?
Yeah, again, I don't think Israel is naive, and the Israeli planners or the Israeli government is naive. And I think what happened in 2005 and followed 2006, I mean, allowing Hamas to run for elections, and I think blocking everything and for Hamas to form a government or to, I don't know if Hamas formed the government will be according to the PLO conditions or the international community conditions, which is recognize Israel, give up the weapons, blah blah. I don't know if Hamas approved this would be a different result or not, but I think, and I will repeat this, because in 2006, not all the people were Hamas. And I know you were referring to the elections that the people chose Hamas in 2006. But I believe that the people wanted to punish the PA for the long-term corruption, for the closure of the political horizon, etc. And they wanted to try something new. But the new thing that was, unfortunately, in 2007, I think, after they took over Gaza by force, they represented themselves as an asset for Iran. And Iran started to heavily invest in Hamas after 2008, 2009. Found them like a proxy for them that is on the, actually within and very close to the Israeli heart. So that's why we saw all this, but I do believe that also that Israel has facilitated the Hamas control in Gaza, and as well we all know it's not a hidden secret that Israel has contributed to strengthen Hamas during the last 20 years.
And if we're getting into, let's move to the present, to the current situation and current reality in Gaza. And you recently, since you moved to the US, you started publishing and writing and one of your pieces that went somewhat viral, titled "Message to Hamas: We're not from you," and you wrote, "Hamas was never one of us Gazans." And to somebody from the outside, from the US or elsewhere, who thinks about Hamas as a liberation force or a liberation actor, what's your response? And what are they missing?
Okay, it's a long history, but I will start with 2004. When Israel has launched a massive assassination campaign against Hamas leaders, starting with the Ahmad Yassin, the founder, and Abdelaziz Rantisi, Ismail Abu Shanab, Ibrahim al-Maqadma, they were actually the goros of Hamas, and they were the leaders that they kept Hamas unified against one purpose, for one purpose, and for one target. And after that, and I think after all this campaign of assassination, it opens the door towards the leadership for someone like Ismail Haniyeh. Ismail Haniyeh was, I met him like 3 times, and he was the least that I can say, I mean, he's dead now, but the least that I can say, he was having a very personal program or a very personal agenda. And this was apparent in the times of his presence in Gaza, and even after he moved from Gaza. And after 2011, when Sinwar was out of the prison, there was a deal between him and Haniyeh, because the Gaza people wanted to take over Hamas, from outside and from inside. So there was like a bargain between Haniyeh and Sinwar. So Sinwar was blackmailing Haniyeh for the corruption of his sons, and eventually reached agreement to send him, like, to support him as the chief of the Politburo in outside Gaza, and Sinwar will take over Gaza field. So this happened, and in 2019, Haniyeh was out of Gaza, and Sinwar took over the entire movement. I think by 2007, and especially after they took over Gaza and whatever the resources in Gaza were, but I started to notice that there is a very distinct separation between the movement and between the people, between Hamas and between the people. And there was started this cult culture. It was represented by Khalil al-Hayya in a very notorious press conference, that when the people asked, I mean, there was blocking for the bank transactions, etc., but Hamas had the money and they did not actually pay the salaries of their employees. And when he was asked, and he said, the money of Hamas is for Hamas, not for the people. So they started actually to separate themselves from the people. And this continued. For example, I was somehow watching the recruitment of the civil servants in the government. And there were, if this guy is not Hamas, we will not hire him. And that was very obvious, very... So, yeah, there was separation. There was... and it's ironically enough to say that even in their statement, that was, by the way, taken off from the... after the publishing, because it was very wrong. In Arabic, we don't say to our people that we are from you and you are from us. We say this to ally or to someone that we want to give them the feeling of that we are together and the same destination, but we don't say this to our people. So it was very revealing. I mean, I don't know that they did this on purpose, but they took off this statement immediately after 6 hours.
And what do you say to people that perceive Hamas as a liberation organization?
I would say that statement was true before 2008, let's say. But after 2008, 2009, there was too many factors actually, or too many viruses implanted inside Hamas. There was the Qatari virus, there was the Iranian virus, and they were working together actually to dismantle Hamas from inside. I think after 2008, we started to see a very Iranian trend inside Hamas, especially in Gaza, because the center of gravity has moved from Syria after the civil war in Syria and moved to Gaza when the leaders in Syria were opposing the Iranian intervention in Syria. So they were somehow denounced from Iran. So they directed all the support to Gaza directly. So the center of gravity moved to Gaza, and they were happy about it. They were happy to, and if we have reviewed the documents that were revealed, I think we were having a very controlled, Iranian-controlled Hamas. So I think this would be valid before 2008, 2009. But I really say this from someone that followed this very closely. And I actually started to say this early in Gaza. And I was punished for this. I was,
You were saying what?
I said that this is not us. This is not Hamas that we knew, and I started to be receiving threats, and I once was kidnapped from the street for saying this. Yeah.
Do you want to say more about?
It was a Peugeot 306 blue car that kidnapped me from the street. Yeah.
For criticizing Hamas.
Criticizing Hamas, and that was in August 2007, because I was vocal against the taking over Gaza by force and by leashing people in the street and lynching people in the streets.
Yeah. So, and you survived that. You survived that.
Yeah, but not. This kind of stuff remains.
Yeah.
So every time that I traveled, it was like a stigma on me. So, I was interrogated, I was questioned, etc.
So maybe take us to Gaza today. I know that you left about 2 years ago, and you still have family there. And on the one hand, for a regular person here, you watch the media, you watch the news, and there was the war ended in October. The IDF retrieved to a yellow line. Supposedly, there is no more active fighting. The Israeli hostages were returned. Certain Palestinian prisoners were released. And recently, 2 weeks ago in Davos, President Trump announced the Board of Peace. They also announced a national technocratic committee for the governance of Gaza of 15 very impressive Palestinians with a really good track record. But the reality on the ground is, there's no housing, no water, no sanitation, really basic stuff. So what can you tell us about what's going on now and how is the day-to-day life? And not just the physical aspect of it, but also, are people waiting for something to happen? Is there anybody they trust? Is there any expectation that something different will happen in any time horizon? Like what's the sentiment? What's keeping people floating there?
So starting with the scene right now. Yesterday, or today, I think, today, but yesterday in Gaza time, there were 18 people were killed by Israeli strikes. And on the 31st of January, there were 32 people were killed. So the fighting stopped, but the kinetic attacks of Israel have continued. And I think Israeli government position is very clear. I think they do not want to go to the phase 2, and they are doing this by force, by actually attacking and killing the Palestinians. I was very hopeful when the phase 2 was announced. The Palestinians have celebrated the return of the last Israeli hostage in Gaza. I mean, they were celebrating literally because they thought that this is an end for their nightmare. And yeah, the scene right now is very, very far away from being peaceful, from being ceasefire or anything. So I don't know how to describe it, but I mean, it's very, very scary. And
how is your family doing?
So my brother and my brothers, actually, they are the only left in Gaza. One of them was imprisoned for 20 months after he was working in the hospital, and he was in February 24. The hospital was stormed by the Israeli troops, and they took all the medical staff. He was with them, and he stayed for 20 months in the prison. He was a very
in Israeli prison.
Yeah, he was very athlete. He was very bigger than me, and when he got out, he was losing like 20 kilograms, 40 pounds of his weight. And on the day of our strike, on 15th of October 23, he buried also his son Yusuf. He was 7 years old. I don't know how. I mean, I'm in contact with them almost every day, and the challenge is the social fabric that is falling apart. Everything is completely redefined and reinstated and rewritten. I think we are facing not only a political or military or catastrophe, but also a social catastrophe. And no one is unfortunately talking about this, about the social fabric that is, the people have developed lethal survival skills, and they were able to commit killing of each other over food or something. But now I hope that the United States will do some pressure on Israel to move forward to the phase 2. I can give the credit for the Palestinians that you described and that they took the job to be in this committee with very bravery of them, because it's almost an impossible mission, and it's very impossible political setup. It's very impossible economic situation and health-wise situation. Everything is falling apart. Everything is destroyed. And I really admire their courage that they took up this mission. Now,
just focusing on that committee, and from what you hear from your brothers and people you talk to in Gaza, what is the one most important thing that they can do that, they cannot solve many things. They cannot solve even little things, but what is an expectation from people in Gaza now, from that committee? Is there any expectation? Is there even any trust that will lead to something?
I think the trust will be generated through delivering services to the people, and I think whatever legitimacy we're talking about will be handed over with the services that, if delivered to the people. I think the people now do not care about politics, do not care about who governs them. I don't think all the people are acquainted with the members of the committee. I think they are waiting for shelters, they are waiting for housing, they are waiting for water, they are waiting for sewage. They are waiting to get out of this shelter, of the tents that they cannot protect them from the heat or from the cold. And we have seen during the heavy rain that was in January, the collapse of houses, that the people preferred to be under instead of going to tents, and it was really a very sad thing to see. But I think now the people are looking up to them to provide services, and I don't know, but I feel that Israel is not allowing this to happen. Israel is looking for a situation similar to the South Lebanon, where they are having, after the ceasefire, without any attack from the Lebanese side, they have conducted more than 10,000 attacks.
So it's really tough because there's so much to unpack, and there's so much detail and so many real realities that are worth talking about. I don't want us to just look at the time, move us to talk about the future. And I know here in the U.S. and this part of the world, there's people really. It's very important to talk about hope, and I personally really always prefer talking about possibilities. I feel hope is something that is very far or almost like a fantasy land, and I feel that I think our life experience is telling us we need to be very grounded and connect to what can be done tomorrow. So in that spirit of thinking about possibilities, I know that Jaser, you've been really talking a lot about the importance of internal peace inside Palestine. And it's complicated because, the war is still ongoing. There's still things happening, and the needs of the basic human needs are still there. But there's something about this sequencing that doesn't add up, because politically, and I want to hear more your thinking about it, but politically you're saying that the Palestinians need to figure out their act, make the peace internally, to unite, to create some sort of a unified kind of front, and the ability to communicate and set priorities and decide on a North Star and then negotiate with whoever. But how do you do that in a reality where, it's survival mode in so many ways? So I'd be curious if you can talk more about this idea of internal peace, why this is so important, and how do you do that in practice? And what's possible in that domain?
I have a metaphor for starting with. You cannot have an organic crops from an unorganic environment. What is the life in Gaza is right now is very damaged, very demolished, very destroyed. And you cannot expect normal leadership or normal political life in Gaza. I'm talking about Gaza because Gaza is where the eye's on right now. So my theory, and it's strange to call it my theory, but theoretically, I would say that allowing a normal life in Gaza, allowing the people to hope, allowing the people to breathe, I think this will allow a normal interaction between the components of the society. But without this, I think we will repeat ourselves. We are putting actually the same conditions where despair and poverty and destruction can be weaponized without giving the people any alternative of Hamas or Islamic Jihad or anything else. The people of Gaza, as far as I know, they are peaceful. They are coping with everyone. They were living under the Israeli occupation. They lived under the Egyptians. They lived under the PA. They lived under Hamas. But now it's a complete different reality, actually. So we need to change things. We need to try something new. We need to be agile. We need to try. I mean, the transitional period is a must, because without services, without the basic services, the people cannot be forced to live politically while they do not have a toilet. So again, I think the people need to understand, the world need to understand, starting with Israel in particular. But I don't have any hope with this current government or this current coalition to start to realize that managing the conflict the concept itself, managing the conflict has failed, and failed very, very loudly. And there must be a way to try something else. And I'm afraid that we did not reach this realization so far.
So I want to ask you, as an Israeli, I see my own society paralyzed when it comes to Palestinians, paralyzed by fear, and a fear that any withdrawal or any concession will result in another October 7th and loss of control. And it's what I'm asking you now is very unfair. I think as a Palestinian, given the power dynamics, as an individual, given your own personal journey. But I just think that, as from an Israeli perspective, just to be honest to this conversation, kind of what is the role, or what are the roles that Palestinians can take to kind of dismantle this Israeli fear. It's a it's symbiotic relationship. We don't live in silos. Although in Israel, we would love to think about the possibility of living in silos. We just build a high wall and we can forget. But I think the reality, the organic reality, is just shows us that it's not doable. That's why, I'm curious. What do you think about that?
I mean, every time this happened, every time there was a big failure or something, the eyes will go down to the Palestinians, what they are demanded to do. I would reflect the opposite, actually. I think the Israelis need to do. And what the Israelis need to do is to stop dehumanizing the Palestinians. From my talks and from my conversations with very high Israeli diplomats and politicians, I realized that how little they know about Gaza, and how they they consider, or they look at Gaza as one object, one particle, or one. They do not have even dimensions for this Gaza. They deal with it, and they look at it like a homogeneous thing, not a society, not a human beings, and I think we are the weakest component of this equation. I think the strongest need to be doing, not the weakest, because I think we have done a lot over the past decades, and I believe also that we need assistance in realizing what our North Star is. I mean, we need an internal peace first, because without this, without reaching, and I'm not talking about to become one component, but to have middle grounds, to have certain amount of goals as Palestinians to work on and to develop, instead of having this fragmentation and this. I think one of the reasons, the big reasons why this happened is the Palestinian fragmentation. And it's everyone's interest to end this fragmentation.
And it is a huge challenge. How do you do that? How do you create that internal peace, and in parallel with everything that is happening? And to kind of my question around what can Palestinians do to dismantle the Israeli fear, which I know it's not a fair question, but the reality is also unfair. I think your answer is also a reflection of just how complicated it is. And I'm not saying in any way that it is the responsibility of Palestinians to do that for Israelis. Not at all. I'm just, as an Israeli who is just very concerned about where we're heading and the options that we have, we need to look for every creative possibility and direction that could maybe generate something different. But you're absolutely right. It's not fair for the burden of such a responsibility to be on the Palestinians. And again, contradicting myself, it's not about fairness. I want to ask you, because I also know we are running out of time when I have time for questions. I want to ask you about. I know that you mentioned to me when we were talking ahead of this conversation that you really hope to be able to go back to Gaza and to have a constructive role in the rebuilding of Gaza. And I'd love to hear what's your vision and what do you think is possible? And not just from a utopian perspective, but I know there is a real concern, I heard from you as well, that things are going to be decided on top of the head of the Palestinians without consultation, without really taking into account what they need. And you mentioned how like the Israelis don't really see Gaza, they don't humanize Gaza, and they see it in a very simplistic way. And you can imagine how it is even from further away in the US and other places where decisions are being made. So how do you, again, this is unfair questions to you, Jaser, but how do you think about it? And what is the role that you would envision for yourself, and what's possible given everything that we know about Gaza and the power dynamics, the global politics, and so on?
As I said before, I think the transitional period is a must. We have a total rupture of everything, and this needs to be workable or working at least to hold the next generation, to hold the next phase, or to hold the next constructive role. What I was inspired by, and I just mentioned it, what I used to do with the local governance and the economic empowerment, I still think and still believe that Gaza has a great potential. And what we have seen a couple of days ago when Rafah crossing was open, and we have seen people coming back to Gaza despite everything. So I think there's a great potential there. I know the people of Gaza. I know how creative they are. And I was reporting about this. I was part of this. I'm still inspired by the things that I've done before 2023. And I think the internal peace is achievable if we find the right intellectuals and the right facilitators, and if there was an honest intentions from surrounding world.
So this is my last question, and this is really about you, because I know you a little bit, not too much. We've been talking for a little while, and one thing is very clear to me, that you are a person that every morning when you wake up, you make a decision that you're gonna be very strategic, how you use your time, and you're gonna prioritize taking care of your family and your kids, and you're gonna do whatever it takes to do that. And you show up in places like this with audience that you don't know, and as you said, you never imagined you're going to be talking and being in this kind of settings. And I wonder, what is it about the human experience that you have gone through and you had to pay a very high price for, that maybe other people don't understand, that gives you the power and the courage to actually every day wake up and do this and be there for your family and just be the person that you are?
Thank you, Lior, for this question. I think I've decided a long time ago, especially after realizing what happened and started to reconcile with the new reality, I decided not to become what hurted me or what hurt me. I decided to invest in my children and to build on seeing them not living in an emergency mode. I've been on the run for the last 2 years, and I think it's time to settle down, to think. And yes, I made decision every day not to become what hurted me this is I consider it my message, my letter, my mission, and this is until it changes.
Hopefully it doesn't.
Inshallah.
Well, thank you.
Hello, thank you both for coming tonight and sharing your time with us. As a student, it truly means the world to us. My question is, at the beginning of your talk, you spoke a little bit about the abstraction over the event that happened on October 7th and after, and that sort of summarization, and you mentioned that you found it, or you thought it to be harmful. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what that abstraction looked like to you, and why you feel that it is particularly
Thank you. I think I meant by abstraction by giving the Gaza the image of Hamas only, and it was only Hamas and Hamas only. This was very different from reality. I don't think the people have supported Hamas in what was done on the 7th of October. I don't think the people are supporting Hamas right now, but unfortunately this was altered, this was distorted by different factors, but starting with the Israeli decision to look at Gaza like one object. And this was apparent in 2025 when there were demonstrations against Hamas in the streets of Gaza in March and May. The Israeli defense minister said that they were staged by Hamas, and despite the fact they were very, very authentic. This is what I meant by abstraction. And unfortunately, this was also highlighted by the Arab media and sometimes suppressed other voices that against Hamas, again, for political agenda and for political,
Thank you very much for sharing your story and raising awareness and presenting what is going on in Gaza in a much more nuanced light. South Africa is a second home to me, and I'm very curious as to how different sectors in Gaza perceived South Africa's decision to go to the International Criminal Court, whether they felt reassured by it, whether they pinned any hopes on what the International Criminal Court could do, based on the case that South Africa put to them about what Israel was doing.
Yeah, thank you very much. The people of Gaza, to be honest, I spent only 2 months in Gaza under the war, and I've never experienced displacement. I've never experienced starvation. But my mother that was killed in July 2025, and she was 75 years old, and she was in very bad health situation. She had to be displaced for 6 times. And I don't remember that we discussed the South African role in the Hague. But I think this sounded very much outside Gaza, because the people in Gaza were very, very busy with keeping alive. So I don't think there were anything besides staying alive that concerns the people in Gaza. But I think it was outside Gaza. It was very big, and I remember that I was in the United Arab Emirates when this all started. And but unfortunately, the people of Gaza were very occupied with what they have been seeing.
Yes, thank you for also wonderful questions. I was considering when you talked about the fear in Israel of Palestinians, and your answer was the dehumanization has to stop, right? But one of the things that struck me also that some of these developments, they are also to some extent happening here. And what I'm thinking of is the militarization of society, a particular use and maybe abuse of religion to mobilize people for negative things and for hate. And maybe I've studied some Hamas, but maybe Hamas did some of that as well in terms of weaponization of particular religious feelings in order to, right, pursue some political goals that may actually not lead to reconciliation and peace. And so my question was this kind of militarization of society, the abuse of religion and theological arguments on the Israeli side. I don't know to what extent it is still happening in Gaza, but very likely in the circumstances. So in that sense, there is something that we all have in common, right? And so we have to think, obviously, of Gaza, because that's where it is worst, and then the West Bank is bad, and you could say maybe even the Palestinian towns within Israel of the 48 boundaries, gangs under development and all that. So there's a lot of really horrible things going around. But to think of ourselves maybe not only as outsiders to everything, that maybe when we think about what needs to be done to overcome this, that we have to think kind of from the US and as people living in the US or anywhere else. Thank you.
Do you have a question as well?
So the question was what you were thinking about that, whether you think about, because you talked about fear alone, and you talked about the dehumanization that needs to stop, and I'm thinking like, are there things that we can do in these different places to go against this kind of militarization and this abuse of religion?
Thank you.
I'm trying to quote someone that I listened to in something called the Jewish Tent in New York, or the BJ Jewish Tent, and she said something that struck me, which was our Judaism was smotriched away from us, and I think this is very true if we apply this to Hamas, because I've been discussing with some students earlier how this happened and how this kind of thinking that is very strange to Islam, very strange to religion, that became the mainstream thinking. And yes, there was a weaponization for religion, but this goes under the weaponization of despair and poverty and economic situation. Because I believe if there was any kind of normal life, and even under Hamas, and the history tells us, because between 2008 until 2012, or 14 at least, 2008, 2014, the tunnel business was flourishing. And the growth rate of Gaza was 25% according to the World Bank, even using illegal trade lines or business lines. But at the same time, it was the coolest and the calmest time between Hamas and Israel. So if there was any kind of normal life, I think the people will prioritize life over death. But unfortunately, when the things are closed and the things are sealed, and you don't have anything but death and but destruction, but economic degradation and everything like this, they will be weaponized, and not only religion.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think of the difference between protesting versus organized work, and which one you feel is more effective.
So I'm really about organized work, because what we have seen during this time, I appreciate the struggle. I appreciate the movement of the students and the campuses, but unfortunately, it was cracked down and it was reflected negatively on them. Right. So at the same time, I think organized work will pay off more and will pay off better, actually. So this is why simply like this, I think the damage that happened, I was at Yale when there was some protest and some demonstrations, and I think it was very negatively perceived. That's why I think we need to learn from others how they use the institutions and how they use the organized channelization. But there's something that I need to say about this. Organized work needs commitment and long-term commitment. And this luxury does not, not everyone that has this luxury, unless it is well-funded and it will care about, etc. But organization is spontaneous and it can be done at the moment, etc. And it will get you to feel good about yourself. So this is the difference, but I really support the organized work. But again, it needs a lot of commitment.
Yeah, thank you for speaking with us. One of the things that I was wondering is what is the role of international community, or how do people like in Gaza see the role of international community? And I'm talking from the perspective of like what you told us today. There is a very different experience that people in Gaza go through that I do not go through, and I don't think there are enough platforms to actually like put the voices of the people in Gaza, to put like their voices out and to like be listened to, so that when international organizations or when these decisions are being taken in international spaces, that their voices are actually there. So I was wondering, what do you think is the role of the international community now, and maybe in the future for like young people like us, what do you think we should be considering when we are like thinking about solutions about societies in an international space that we might not even actually have an understanding of?
First of all, we need to define the international community because it's being redefined and rewritten in front of our eyes. So we need to, is it the UN, is it the countries, is it the Board of Peace, the new UN and the new, I don't know. But I will answer the second question, which is, I hope that the people, whenever they have the responsibility and they have the position to educate themselves, not from the intelligence reports, not from the official reports that are always censored and are beautifying things and etc. But go down to the people on the ground and listen to them, not listen about them. So listen directly to them and engage with them. This is my message for anyone that is in an international position.
Also, just to kind of connect and highlight what Jaser was saying, I think there is this difference between reading about stuff and trying to make sense of things from distance, which, we all have our limitations and we're trying to do the best we can. But there's a big difference between that and actually being with people and living with them, or being with them as they're experiencing, or trying to connect at the human level. And part of the big challenge in Gaza for Gazans is this dehumanization, which is not only the result of bad intentions, which some of it is, or bad policy, but a lot of it is just the result of just how we are as human beings. People on the other side of the world, they feel that they want to do the right thing because of their own values and their own belief system and the causes they believe in. And and there is also there could be an effect of dehumanizing the people that you're trying to support, and it's really kind of this beautiful thing about being in university, where actually in the real life outside university, you have to deliver certain things. You have to deliver certain goods. You have to make money. You have to take care of your family. You have to have deliver things for your employer, for your employees, for your colleagues. There's something beautiful about university which you actually just need to learn. And I know that probably some of you do more than just learning, but it's this kind of privilege of doing exactly what Jaser said. Can you be in that learning space? Not you, but can people in university be in the learning space and not feel that everything it's about identity? Because my sense being at Harvard and I'm a visitor here, I'm here only for the past 2 years. My sense is that identity trumps learning, and there's something about this balance is just wrong, especially in university. I think in the outside world it's more complicated, but there's something about university that actually can help you simplify things, because there's no cost. I mean, I'm really trying to learn. I'm really trying to grow and be better and understand. And it's not about deciding even. And I hope it connects also to some of the other questions that you're referring here, lady here in the front, in the sense of echo chambers and how we just, as somebody who's been working a lot on negotiation, one of the best advice that I got in my career is that really to pay attention when I feel really good about something. When somebody said something that I heard somebody on a podcast or on TV, or when somebody tells me something in person and I feel like really good and I feel like, oh, this is my people, like I bond to that idea, I just notice that, okay, just be careful also feeling very good about certain things that you hear, and try to ask questions and not to go with the flow just because you felt good about it. And again, I'm not talking about this particular political camp, or it's really just, I feel we need to connect to humanity, humanizing people, humanizing situations, and also remembering that we as humans, we have our biology and cognition, and we're going to be doing shortcuts because at the end of the day, we strive for feeling good, whether we like it or not. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. You mentioned in the talk that Israel views Gaza as one object, and I wanted to hear your opinions about how Gaza or the conflict itself is portrayed in the U.S., or how people in the U.S. are perceiving that, the Gaza or the conflict.
For Jaser, just to clarify, so I understand the question. So you're asking how people in the U.S. or outside are perceiving the conflict?
And what do you think about those? And what do you think about those perceptions?
I'm very new to the United States, to be honest, and the first encounter was about this. I found again, not dealing with Gaza as an object in the United States, but people were very little informed about Gaza. And not only this, they sometimes chose to be little informed, to not feel responsible or to not feel guilty or something, because the United States is whatever. Again, this is, but at the same time, there are very courageous people that trying to educate people and to put some information out there. But also there's a great deal of censorship as well. So this is what I saw, and this is my very plain observation of what I have seen. Yeah.
Thank you both so much for sharing all of your stories. I just wanted to go back to Jaser's point about he sort of turned the question about Israelis dealing with fear. So maybe I'm going to ask an unfair question, about what do you, Lior, see as like possible paths for change in Israel? Obviously you said there's not much hope with the government, as is. What do you see? Yeah, possibilities. And if you have thoughts on that too, feel free to share.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So as I said, I don't like to frame things as hope, but I appreciate the question about possibilities. And I think from my understanding and conversations with different people in Israel in the political space, I think there is a real opportunity for a reckoning and thinking differently. And I don't say it necessarily in the sense of there's going to be tomorrow a new Israeli government that will say we want peace with the Palestinians, or we want to change fundamentally the way we relate and the way we exercise power and the way we exercise control. I don't think that's necessarily should be the expectation. I think, however, that there is an opening where people are realizing that whatever it is that we did and we thought about what we're doing and the assumption we had about why we do these things, it didn't serve us. And it blew up in our face, and it's not working. And we also have an American administration that is very blunt about things like peace, something that was a taboo in the Israeli society for the last 2 generations. So I think the combination of an American administration that really believes in peace, whatever we think about what it means, like the practicality of it, but there is a president that really believes in that idea, and I think they're trying to reinvent things, and they're trying to be creative. At the same time, you have an Israeli government, and hopefully a new government that will be composed of a variety of parties that will represent much more of the Israeli fabric, that will, in the absence of feeling kind of the competition all the time with the far right, they will have the confidence to actually start asking serious questions. That's what I'm hearing in private conversations, that there is the openness and the realization that we need to start asking serious questions about our relation with the Palestinians. So for me, that's the possibility that I see, because once you start asking questions, then it becomes, okay, so what do we do with that? How do you support that questions? How do you support those processes? And, okay, so who do you need answers from? Maybe from Palestinians, maybe from other friends or people that you thought are not your friends. But that just opened the space for something different. And so far, we've been very consumed by avoidance. Or avoidance has been the mode of operation of this issue. So I hope that answers.
Last word, I promise. Lior and I, sitting next to each other and having this conversation, this dialogue, I think it defies the reality, and not the reality, the illusion that there is nothing. This conflict is unbreakable or unsolvable, etc. I think sitting here together, I think it's an opportunity, and it's a representation, a small one, for what can be done. And the people remain human beings, behind the hashtags and behind the mainstream headlines, etc. So thank you for your questions. They were very tough.
So we are at time. Please thank again Lior and Jaser for being here with us this evening.